Now on BBC One, the news with Mishal Husain.
The president of Cyprus tries to diffuse anger over the terms of an EU bailout, saying his country risks bankruptcy. Cash machines have been emptied as a tax of up to 10% on savings is announced. British troops serving in Cyprus will be protected. Last-minute attempts at a deal on press regulation as David Cameron faces Nick Clegg siding with Labour in tomorrow's Commons vote. Changes to pensions and social care in Wednesday's budget, but the Chancellor says there'll be no easy answers to Britain's economic woes.
This is BBC Television, broadcasting from the television centre.
Not for much longer, as BBC News says goodbye to an iconic building. We look back over 40 years. Good evening. The President of Cyprus has warned that his country faces bankruptcy unless it accepts the terms of an international bailout. There's been shock and anger in Cyprus since it was announced that the deal includes savers paying a levy of up to 10% on the money in their accounts. Here, the government's promised that British troops serving in Cyprus will not be affected. Our correspondent Mark Lowen has this report from Nicosia.
Regular training for British reserve troops in Cyprus. Over 3,000 are here. They too are in the firing line of the new tax on savings. It's worried many, but the Chancellor has reassured them.
We are going to compensate anyone who is affected by this bank tax. People who are doing their duty for our country in Cyprus will be protected from this Cypriot bank tax.
But no such comfort for the thousands of British residents in Cyprus. For 30 years, Alan Thomas has savoured the Mediterranean lifestyle here. Never did he expect that his savings would suffer.
They see it like robbery. They're just coming in and taking money off people without any... The money in the bank is supposed to be secure, right? And it's not. They just took it.
The problem signs were there. Cyprus is a tax haven with an oversized banking sector. It lent heavily to Greece and was struck by contagion. Almost half of the depositors are foreign, and the new bank tax will also hit the money launderers. Tonight, the President made a national address. This was, he said, the lesser of two evils.
This solution is certainly not the one we would have wanted, but it is the least painful under the circumstances, because above all, it leaves the operation of this country in our hands.
But in the smoky bars of the capital, the anger is bubbling. A tiny Eurozone nation feels blackmailed by the powerful.
If we don't accept the tax, that everyone will lose their jobs and there will be a collapse.
Tomorrow and after tomorrow it will be a lot of demonstrations in this country, and they don't have the right to take the money from the pocket of the people.
Some people have worked for for 20 years, for 30 years, and they have saved their money for their kids, for the future. They just come and take it like that. Who gives them the right?
The fear now is that this tax could spread panic far beyond Cyprus. For even if Brussels says it's a one-off, savers in other indebted countries might look at what's happening here and wonder if they're next. And that could hit banks across Europe and shake the Eurozone's fragile calm of the past few months. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Nicosia.
Well, anyone with accounts in Cypriot banks here in the UK won't be affected, but the terms of this bailout are in contrast with previous deals for Ireland, Greece, Portugal and Spain. Let's join our Europe editor, Gavin Hewitt, who's in Brussels. What is the thinking there, Gavin, on what's happening in Cyprus?
Well, Michelle, Europe's leaders are very worried about the fact that the Cypriot Parliament might actually reject this bailout deal. They're being told the mood on the island is angry and resentful. And the Cypriot president has made clear that if this deal is rejected, two banks could collapse, but also the country would face bankruptcy. But there are moves tonight to try and perhaps soften the impact of some of this on some of those smaller depositors and savers. And I have to say, say elsewhere in Europe, there is unease about the fairness of this deal. One very senior official actually said, you know, it wasn't ordinary people who were responsible for this. Even the German finance minister has seemed to distance himself a little by saying it's up to the European Commission and the European Central Bank to explain what lay behind this to the Cypriot people. Now, what happens tomorrow if the Cypriot Parliament rejects the deal? Then the Eurozone will be back in full crisis mode, and as Mark has explained, all eyes will be on the rest of Europe to see what depositors elsewhere do with their funds. Michelle.
Gavin, thank you. Gavin Hewitt, our Europe editor in Brussels there. The Culture Secretary, Maria Miller, has said that she still hopes for a cross-party deal on press regulation to avert what could be a bruising defeat for the Prime Minister in the House of Commons tomorrow. Without a deal, David Cameron and Nick Clegg will be on opposing sides of the issue, with the Liberal Democrats siding with Labour and calling for a new system to be enshrined in law. Here's our political correspondent, Ian Watson.
After more than 3 months of talks and just 24 hours before a crucial Commons vote, there's still no deal on how to regulate the press. Negotiations are continuing, but David Cameron could face defeat tomorrow because his Lib Dem coalition partner Nick Clegg is still siding with Labour's Ed Miliband. David Cameron opposes any hint of state regulation. He believes a royal charter, the kind of thing which currently governs the BBC, is the best way of setting out the responsibilities of newspapers while keeping them free from political interference. Labour and the Lib Dems want any charter written into law, and while there's some room for compromise, the Prime Minister is still reluctant.
But ultimately we're very clear, and the Prime Minister is very clear on this, that we believe that a Royal Charter is a strong way forward. It provides the sort of tough self-regulation that the Leveson Principles set out.
But other issues have been casting a shadow over the discussions. Labour and the Lib Dems want to make it even clearer that the press shouldn't be able to pick and choose the people who regulate them. And when they get things wrong, the press should be told exactly how to apologise.
We want to be sure that if the regulator finds that the press code has been breached and the newspapers have done something wrong and they need to apologise and issue a correction, that actually the regulator can say, well, if this was a front page story, then you really need to do your correction on the front page and not bury it on page 26.
Attempts to reach some kind of agreement on press regulation haven't yet been abandoned. David Cameron and Nick Clegg are expected to talk ahead of the crucial vote in the Commons tomorrow. Now, if they can't come together, it is possible that the Prime Minister will be defeated. That could erode his authority in the short term, but he could then go into the next general election portraying himself as a champion of press freedom. In difficult economic times, how to police the press isn't top of everyone's political agenda, but it's an issue which could still undermine the Prime Minister and highlight a very public split in the coalition. Ian Watson, BBC News, Westminster.
The Chancellor, who's preparing to deliver his budget on Wednesday, has said he's bringing forward plans to introduce a simpler state pension as well as a cap on social care costs. George Osborne again defended his approach to tackling the deficit, arguing that anything else would leave the UK facing economic disaster. The Shadow Chancellor, Ed Balls, has likened the government's economic policies to a lunatic farm. This report from Adam Fleming.
Ahead of this week's budget, the Chancellor is clearly trying to appeal to older voters. A year earlier than planned, in 2016, he'll introduce the new simplified state pension, along with the cap on the cost of adult social care in England, which will now be £3,000 more generous. But George Osborne wouldn't be drawn on reports that he'll inject billions into housing. And he's sticking to his strategy for bringing down the deficit.
But there is no easy answer to Britain's problems. There's no miracle cure, because, of course, if there was a miracle cure, it would have been deployed. It's just a lot of hard work of dealing with Britain's debts, helping businesses create jobs, helping families who want to work hard and get on.
While George Osborne gets on with the budget here at the Treasury, he's been getting advice from all sides. Many of his own MPs would like deeper spending cuts and tax cuts to boost business. From the Liberal Democrat part of the coalition, the Business Secretary Vince Cable has called for more investment in infrastructure. While Labour's Ed Balls is calling for a complete change of direction.
George Osborne said, I'll secure the recovery. We had a double-dip recession. He said, I'll get the borrowing down, it's going up. He said, I'll secure the AAA rating. We've now lost it. The only reason why they won't now change course is to avoid their own political humiliation.
They're all likely to be disappointed because the Chancellor says he's going to stick with the tough decisions he's already made in previous budgets. Adam Fleming, BBC News, Westminster.
China's dream of economic development will remain the priority. That's according to its new president, who's just made his first speech in the job. Xi Jinping said he would fight for a great renaissance of his country, tackle corruption and help the middle class. Our correspondent Damien Grammaticus was watching in Beijing.
Dawn over Beijing. In the heart of Chinese power, a new era just beginning. The smog hung thick as 1 billion people waited to hear from their new leaders. Xi Jinping took the stage. China's new president spoke of his Chinese dream, a strong nation ruled over by the Communist Party, where all share in China's new prosperity.
The Communist Party is the core power that leads and unites all our people. The party must govern itself, it must improve its leadership and its ability to fight corruption.
The man now ruling over the world's rising superpower has worked his way through the party's ranks, but he comes from a powerful, rich family. His daughter, seen here, is now among the many children of China's elites studying in America. Also entering today a new premier and cabinet. Their priority to keep China's economy growing fast, but make it fairer, more sustainable, less polluting. The same promises were made by the outgoing ministers.
Talking the talk is not as good as walking the walk. However deep the water, we will wade into it. We have no alternative. The future of our country depends on it.
The pollution out here in Beijing is so bad today, it's even obscuring Chairman Mao's view of Tiananmen Square. If his successors in the new leadership are to transform China, then the most powerful vested interest they'll have to take on are within the Communist Party itself, and they won't give up their wealth and privilege without a fight. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Beijing.
Pope Francis has delivered his first Angelus prayer and blessing to a crowd of thousands in St. Peter's Square in Rome. Rather than sticking to his prepared speech, he made several off-the-cuff remarks and earlier went for an impromptu walkabout after celebrating Sunday Mass. Alan Little reports from Rome.
From early morning they started to gather and latecomers had to rush to secure a place. You sense the hope of renewal the new Pope has brought to the faithful. Pilgrims have come from around the world to be here when he's inaugurated Pope on Tuesday. This is his distinctive public skill, the ability to address a vast crowd in the casual style of a parish priest at his Sunday lectern.
I'm happy to greet you on the Lord's Day. It's important for us Christians to meet and talk together in this square. Through the media, we are gathering together like this across the whole world.
Doctrinally, Pope Francis is no different to his predecessor. Like Pope Benedict, he wants a new evangelization to bring an increasingly secular world back to the traditional values of the Church. But Pope Francis has a much more common touch, consciously presenting himself as a man of the people, and already he seems to be re-energizing the faithful.
Earlier, after celebrating Sunday Mass, he unnerved his security staff by going on a spontaneous walkabout, appearing to head for the gates of the Vatican and the teeming streets of Rome beyond. They didn't let him get that far. He ended today with a gesture to please the Italians, and it did.
Buona domenica e buon pranzo.
Enjoy your Sunday, he said. Have a good lunch. Alan Little, BBC News in St. Peter's Square.
Sport now for a full roundup of all the day's action. Let's join Ollie Foster at the BBC Sports Centre. Hello, Ollie.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks very much indeed. The new Formula One season has started, and Lewis Hamilton says he was really happy with his debut for Mercedes after coming fifth in the Australian Grand Prix. Kimi Raikkonen won the race. Defending champion Sebastian Vettel was third. Nick Parrott reports.
All the talk down under was how to stop Sebastian Vettel. For the last 3 years, the pretenders to his crown have struggled for an answer. among them Lewis Hamilton.
Lights out, away we go!
On his debut for Mercedes, Hamilton surprised everyone by starting from third and eventually finishing fifth. And after staying out while others stopped for fresh tyres, he even briefly led the race. Adrian Sutil followed suit and found himself at the front for the first time in his 91-race career. When he eventually decided to change his tyres, Vettel chased him into the pits, but he couldn't get the better of his fellow German. Sutil was back with Force India after a year out, but with 15 laps to go, he surrendered his second stint at the front to another comeback man, Kimi Räikkönen. He returned to Formula One last season after a 2-year break, and the man nicknamed the Iceman slipped past the opposition, moving his Lotus up from 7th.
This is going to be a fully deserved victory.
The last time Räikkönen won the opening race was 2007, when he went on to claim the championship. The Finn has got a head start, but he'll have to keep his eye on Vettel if he's going to stop him claiming a 4th title in a row. Nick Parrott, BBC News.
St Mirren have won the Scottish League Cup after beating Hearts 3-2 at Hampden Park. They came from behind and Connor Newton scored what proved to be the winner in the second half. It's 26 years since the club last won a major trophy and the first time that they've lifted the League Cup. There were 4 games in the Premier League today. Match of the Day's got the goals straight after the news, but I've got the results coming up if you want them. Chelsea are up to 3rd in the Premier League after beating West Ham 2-0 at Stamford Bridge. Frank Lampard scored his 200th goal for the club. Eden Hazard got their 2nd. They climb above Spurs, who lost 1-0 at home to Fulham. Wigan helped their cause in the relegation battle by beating Newcastle 2-1. Aruna Kone scored the winner in the last minute. Elsewhere, Norwich and Sunderland drew 1-1. In rugby union, Harlequins have won the LV Anglo-Welsh Cup. They beat Sale 32-14 in the final at Worcester's Sixways Stadium. They scored 4 tries, including this one for Tom Casson. Finally, frustration for England's cricketers. More rain in New Zealand on the final day of the second test, and that match is heading for a draw. That's all your sport. Mishal.
Ollie, thank you. Now, this is the very last BBC One News Bulletin from what has been our home for over 40 years, Television Centre in West London, which has been sold and will be redeveloped. Before we leave here, though, Nick Hyam has been looking back through the archives of the broadcast from this iconic building.
The year was 1969. The Vietnam War was at its height. Man landed on the moon, and BBC Television News moved to a new home. A futuristic television centre first conceived in 1949.
This is BBC Television News.
Television news in those days was a macho business and involved an awful lot of smoking.
I would have thought there might have been some point in having him explain this.
There were some women. One became a star.
About a car connected with an alleged bomb plot.
Visiting the old studios, she remembered what an exciting place it had been to work.
Everybody was working on typewriters, so there was a noise. There were banks of televisions everywhere where the material was coming in on film from people who were foreign correspondents working abroad. And there was such a buzz about the place. It was, I think, every news man or woman's dream to come and work at Television Centre in television news at that time.
VG20. From these studios and their successors, the BBC covered history as it happened.
After an earlier confrontation down the end, which looked at the time like the kind of civil rights clash we knew from years ago.
I'm not allowed to say how many planes joined the raid, but I counted them all out, and I counted them all back.
Dawn, and as the sun breaks through the piercing chill of night on the plain outside Coram, it lights up a biblical famine, now in the 20th century.
15 years ago, new high-tech news studios opened at Television Centre. By now, news was broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Terrorists attacked the heart of America with catastrophic loss of life.
Bankruptcies, bailouts and trading bans triggered the most tumultuous week on world markets in living memory.
Reporters risked their lives.
Security. Get security.
And sometimes Television Centre made the news.
And I do apologise if you're hearing quite a lot of noise in this studio at the moment. I'm afraid that we have rather been invaded by some people who we hope to be removing very shortly.
That was an IRA bomb. So from tomorrow, these studios and this, frankly, by now rather shabby newsroom will have shut down. But the show goes on. Television news is joining radio news and the BBC World Service at a new home in central London. Nick Hyam, BBC News, for the last time at Television Centre.
So that's it. Do join us tomorrow for the BBC News at 1, which will be our first bulletin from Broadcasting House. Time now for the news where you are and from the team here at Television Centre tonight. Goodbye.